The scent of aged paper and the faint hum of jazz floating through the bookstore air were comforting to Michael, a constant amid the chaos of the world outside. He moved like a shadow among the towering shelves, his worn apron tied neatly, his calm demeanor concealing the tangled storms of his own life. It was just another late afternoon when she walked in, the bell above the door tinkling as if to announce her presence. Amanda was a woman who didn't so much enter a room as command it. She paused in the doorway, her sharp green eyes surveying the store with an air of someone looking for something, or perhaps someone. Michael's first impression was that she didn't belong here, not in the dusty corners of this obscure little bookshop. She was elegance personified, perfectly tailored trench coat, the clack of her boots on the hardwood floor echoing softly. And yet, she didn't carry the aloofness one might expect. Instead, there was a flicker of curiosity on her face, like she was searching for more than just a book. "Can I help you?" Michael asked, his voice steady but with just a hint of intrigue. Her gaze snapped to him, and for a moment, the world seemed to tilt. "I'm looking for a recommendation," she said, her voice warm, disarmingly genuine. Michael took a step closer, adjusting the stack of books in his hands. "What kind of stories do you like?" "I'm not sure anymore," she said softly, almost to herself. "Surprise me." Over the next hour, they spoke in a way that felt more like an unraveling than a conversation. She told him about the French poetry she used to love but hadn't read in years, and he suggested a rare anthology that had just come in. Their hands brushed as she accepted it, and Michael felt something stir in the quiet recesses of his heart. When Amanda left, the weight of the air seemed to shift, leaving Michael standing there, inexplicably lighter and yet heavier all at once. Days turned into weeks, and Amanda became a regular at the bookstore, each visit an unspoken agreement to pick up where they had left off. They shared quiet moments over dusty volumes, laughter over the eccentricities of other customers, and glances that lingered just a little too long. Michael, with his calm and dependable nature, seemed to anchor her in a way neither fully understood. And then came the dinner invitation. A simple question scrawled on the back of a receipt she handed him one day. For Michael, the quiet bookstore boy who had always lived his life on the sidelines, it felt like stepping onto a stage. But he said yes. The rest, as people often say, was history. Except history for them would not be kind. They were married a year after their first meeting. Their first year together was filled with love, quiet adventures, and a sense of partnership Michael had only ever dreamed of. But beneath the surface, there were cracks Amanda's charm and Michael's patience couldn't quite patch. Michael was too kind, too steady, she'd tease sometimes, and though he laughed along, the words lingered in his mind long after the moments passed. Amanda's restless energy, the very thing that had captivated Michael, now seemed to outpace him. As the months wore on, subtle shifts began to ripple through their seemingly perfect union. Small criticisms cloaked as jokes, late nights explained away with vague excuses, and a distance Michael couldn't quite close no matter how hard he tried. What Michael didn't know was that Amanda was not simply outgrowing him, she was hiding something that would change everything. Amanda's discontent wasn't sudden. It crept in slowly, like a quiet leak that goes unnoticed until it floods the room. At first, she could explain it away. Life was busy, work was demanding, maybe she was just tired. But as the weeks turned into months, Amanda couldn't deny the growing knot in her chest every time she looked at Michael. Michael, kind and dependable as ever, seemed oblivious to her shifting emotions. He still brewed her coffee in the mornings, still reached for her hand during quiet evenings on the couch. But to Amanda, these gestures, once endearing, began to feel like weights anchoring her to a version of herself she no longer recognized. The woman who had married Michael was different, idealistic, perhaps even naive. Now, Amanda saw herself as someone with bigger dreams, sharper edges, and a gnawing dissatisfaction she couldn't quite place. The night of Sophie's dinner party was when Amanda first realized just how deep her discontent ran. Michael had been his usual self, quiet and courteous, blending into the background while Amanda moved through the crowd. Sophie's home was everything Amanda had once dreamed of, sleek and modern, filled with art and soft lighting that cast a golden glow over the assembled guests. The air buzzed with conversation, the kind of chatter that made Amanda feel alive. And then there was Daniel. Tall, confident, with a subtle charm that drew people to him, Daniel had introduced himself with a warm handshake and an easy smile. "You're Amanda, right? Sophie's told me about you. She said you're the brains behind your team." Amanda had laughed, the compliment hitting just the right note. "Sophie exaggerates." "Doubt it," Daniel said, his eyes holding hers a beat too long. "I can tell you're impressive." Michael had been in the corner of the room then, chatting with one of Sophie's colleagues about a book he'd read. Amanda glanced at him, feeling a flicker of guilt, but it was drowned out by the thrill of Daniel's attention. As the evening wore on, Daniel's charm proved magnetic. They talked about everything: art, travel, their favorite books, and Amanda found herself laughing in a way she hadn't in months. When Michael approached with her coat at the end of the night, she almost felt annoyed, like he was interrupting something she wasn't ready to let go. On the drive home, Michael broke the silence. "You seem to hit it off with Daniel." Amanda bristled, her tone sharper than intended. "Are you jealous?" Michael frowned, taken aback. "No, of course not. I'm just saying you seemed happy." "God, Michael," she said, exasperated. "It's called making conversation." He didn't respond, and they drove the rest of the way in silence. Amanda stared out the window, guilt gnawing at the edges of her irritation, but she pushed it aside. The following weeks brought subtle yet undeniable changes. Amanda began comparing Michael to the men she interacted with, her colleagues, the polished professionals she met at events, and, of course, Daniel. It wasn't that Michael had changed, it was that her perception of him had. His plain appearance, his lack of ambition, his contentment with his job at the bookstore, all the things Amanda had once loved about him now felt like glaring flaws. She started noticing the little things. The way his hair always seemed slightly unkempt, the way his shoulders hunched when he read, the fact that he seemed perfectly happy with his worn-out sneakers and $20 watch. Michael's world was small, Amanda realized, and she wanted more. She wanted weekends in Paris, dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, and conversations about big ideas, not whether to alphabetize the fiction section. Michael, ever perceptive in his quiet way, sensed the growing distance but didn't know how to close it. He tried in his own way, bringing her flowers, suggesting date nights, asking about her day. But Amanda's responses were curt, distracted. She was polite, but her warmth was gone, replaced by a cool detachment Michael couldn't ignore. "Is everything okay?" he asked one night as they lay in bed, the space between them feeling vast despite the small size of the mattress. Amanda turned away, feigning exhaustion. "I'm fine. Just tired." But she wasn't fine. She was restless, filled with a longing she couldn't articulate. The tipping point came on their second wedding anniversary. Michael had planned a quiet evening at home, a candlelit dinner, soft music, and a small but thoughtful gift, a first-edition copy of Amanda's favorite book. He closed the bookstore early, spent the afternoon cooking, and waited for her with nervous anticipation. Amanda, meanwhile, had completely forgotten. She had agreed to drinks with Sophie and Daniel after work, their conversations stretching late into the evening. It wasn't until she glanced at her phone and saw the time that she realized her mistake. When she walked through the door, Michael was still at the table, the candles burned down to stubs. "You're late," he said, his voice soft but tinged with hurt. Amanda froze, her cheeks flushing. "Was tonight something?" Michael's face fell. "It's our anniversary." Her heart sank. "Michael, I'm so sorry. I lost track of time." "It's okay," he said quickly, cutting her off. "I know you're busy." But it wasn't okay. Amanda could see it in his eyes, the disappointment he tried to hide. They sat together for a while, the silence heavy between them, until Michael finally stood and began clearing the table. From that night on, Amanda's dissatisfaction hardened into resentment. She began avoiding Michael, finding excuses to stay out late or retreating into her phone when they were together. She told herself it wasn't her fault, that Michael's lack of ambition, his contentment with their small life, was the real problem. What Amanda couldn't admit, even to herself, was that she had begun seeking validation elsewhere. Daniel's texts became a lifeline, his compliments a reminder of what it felt like to be admired. She told herself it was harmless, just a friendship, but she knew better. Each message she sent, each laugh they shared, was a step further from Michael and the life they had built together. Michael noticed the changes but didn't know how to confront them. Every time he tried to bring it up, Amanda deflected or accused him of being overbearing. "Can't you just trust me?" she snapped one evening, and Michael, unwilling to push further, retreated. Late one night, Amanda lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Michael was asleep beside her, his breathing steady, his hand resting lightly on hers. She felt a surge of guilt so intense it made her stomach twist. But as the minutes passed, it faded, replaced by the same question that had haunted her for months. Was this all there was? With her growing dissatisfaction and the emotional chasm between them, Amanda found herself at a crossroads. The secrets she kept and the choices she made would soon test the fragile foundations of their marriage, threatening to shatter the life they had once dreamed of building together. The night Amanda came home drunk was one Michael would never forget. He'd been waiting up for her again, something he'd grown accustomed to lately. She had called earlier, her voice slurring slightly, saying she was out with Sophie and some colleagues. Michael didn't argue. He'd stopped trying to question her nights out. It always led to fights he couldn't win. Instead, he sat on the couch, flipping aimlessly through the channels, a dull ache settling in his chest. It was nearly 2 a.m. when the door swung open, and Amanda stumbled in. Her coat hung crookedly off one shoulder, her shoes clutched in one hand. Michael stood and walked toward her, catching the scent of wine and perfume as she swayed slightly. "You're late," he said softly, concern lacing his tone. "Late for what?" Amanda replied, her voice louder than necessary, her words stumbling over each other. She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that made Michael flinch. "For coming home," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Are you okay?" "God, Michael," she said, waving him off as she kicked off her heels. "Why do you always have to be so boring?" The words stung, but Michael swallowed his hurt. "Let's get you some water." She groaned but followed him into the kitchen. As he handed her the glass, Amanda leaned against the counter, her eyes glazed but oddly focused on him. "Do you ever wonder," she said, her words slow and deliberate, "why we even got married?" Michael froze, the question hanging in the air between them. "What are you talking about?" "I mean, look at you," she said, gesturing at him with the glass in her hand. "You're so predictable. Plain. God, Michael, when was the last time you did something exciting? Something that made me feel anything?" Her voice was sharp, each word a dagger. Michael stared at her, his throat tightening. "Amanda, you're drunk. Let's talk about this tomorrow." "No," she said, setting the glass down with a thud. "We should talk about it now. I've been trying to pretend that this," she gestured between them, "is enough. But it's not, Michael. You're not." The silence that followed was suffocating. Michael felt like the floor beneath him had cracked open, and he was falling into an abyss. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm saying," Amanda said, her words slurred but cruelly clear, "I'm not attracted to you anymore. I don't even know if I ever was. Maybe I just convinced myself I could be happy with this." Michael didn't respond. He couldn't. He turned away, his chest heaving as he fought to steady his breathing. Amanda watched him, her expression unreadable, before muttering, "I'm going to bed," and walking out of the kitchen. Michael stood there for a long time, the sound of her footsteps fading into the background. Her words replayed in his mind like a broken record. "I'm not attracted to you anymore." The days that followed were a blur of silence and distance. Amanda, embarrassed by her outburst but too proud to apologize, avoided Michael as much as possible. She convinced herself that she hadn't said anything he didn't already know. Their marriage was crumbling, better to let it fall than try to hold it together with lies. Michael, on the other hand, was unraveling. He couldn't shake the image of Amanda standing in the kitchen, her words cutting through him like shards of glass. He began to withdraw, retreating into himself in a way Amanda had never seen before. He stopped trying to make conversation, stopped asking about her day, stopped waiting up for her when she went out. One evening, as Amanda was getting ready to leave for yet another dinner with Sophie, she noticed Michael sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the television. "I'm going out," she said, half expecting him to ask where or with whom. Okay, he said without looking at her. The simplicity of his response caught her off guard. For a moment, she hesitated, an unfamiliar pang of guilt tugging at her. But she brushed it aside, grabbing her coat and heading out the door. Michael's withdrawal didn't go unnoticed by others. At the bookstore, his colleagues commented on how quiet he'd become, how distracted. Even customers remarked on the change in the once cheerful sales associate who now seemed like a shadow of himself. One afternoon, his manager, an older woman named Beth, pulled him aside. "Michael, is everything okay?" she asked gently. He forced a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine." But Beth wasn't convinced. "You don't seem fine. If you ever need to talk..." "Thanks," he said quickly, cutting her off. "I appreciate it." Beth nodded, though her worry lingered. As Michael returned to the counter, he felt a wave of shame. He hated that his personal life was bleeding into his work, that people were starting to notice just how broken he felt. At home, the atmosphere was suffocating. Amanda's criticism became sharper, more frequent. She picked at everything: his appearance, his habits, his job. One evening, as he stood in the kitchen making dinner, she walked in and wrinkled her nose. "Do you have to wear that old sweater? It makes you look frumpy." Michael glanced down at the sweater, one of his favorites, and shrugged. "I'll change later." "Maybe you should just get rid of it," she muttered, grabbing a bottle of wine and leaving the room. Michael stared after her, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He felt like he was suffocating, trapped in a marriage that had turned into a battlefield where he was constantly under attack. The breaking point came one rainy Saturday evening. Michael had spent the day at the bookstore, trying to lose himself in work, while Amanda had been out with Sophie and Daniel. When he came home, he found Amanda sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in hand. "You're late," she said, her tone accusatory. Michael frowned. "I had to close up." "You knew that?" Amanda rolled her eyes. "Of course. The almighty bookstore. Your sanctuary." Her words dripped with sarcasm, and Michael felt his patience snap. "What's your problem, Amanda? Why do you keep doing this?" "Doing what?" she shot back, standing to face him. "Treating me like I'm some failure," he said, his voice rising. "Like I'm not enough for you." Amanda laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Maybe because you're not, Michael. God, I've been trying to tell you for months, but you just don't get it." Michael's chest tightened. "So what? You've just decided to punish me? To make me feel worthless?" Amanda's expression hardened. "I don't have to make you feel anything, Michael. You do that all on your own." The room fell silent, the sound of rain tapping against the windows the only noise. Michael stared at her, his heart pounding. "If that's how you feel," he said finally, his voice trembling, "then why are you still here?" Amanda didn't answer. She couldn't. She turned away, her shoulders stiff, and walked upstairs, leaving Michael standing alone in the dimly lit living room. That night, as Michael lay awake in the empty bed they once shared, he made a decision. He couldn't keep living like this, couldn't keep letting Amanda's words chip away at him until there was nothing left. Something had to change. What neither of them realized was that this change, when it came, would unravel everything they thought they knew about each other and themselves. The party was a glittering haze of lights and laughter, held at Sophie's lavish downtown apartment. Amanda had insisted on attending, despite Michael's reluctance. Parties weren't his scene, but Amanda had a way of brushing aside his discomfort with a casual, "You'll be fine." She wanted to go, so they went. The evening started like so many others in their unraveling marriage. Amanda, vibrant and magnetic, flitted from conversation to conversation, her laughter echoing over the hum of music. Michael, in his understated way, lingered near the edges of the crowd, nursing a drink and wondering how much longer he could endure. He watched her from across the room, noting the way her smile seemed brighter for everyone else but him. And then Daniel appeared. Michael recognized him instantly, though they'd never been formally introduced. He was everything Michael wasn't: sharp, charming, and exuding an effortless confidence. Amanda's face lit up when she saw him, a reaction that tightened something in Michael's chest. He watched as Daniel leaned in close to whisper something that made Amanda laugh, her hand lightly brushing his arm. Michael looked away, trying to ignore the knot in his stomach. He told himself it didn't mean anything, that Amanda was just enjoying herself. But the longer he stood there, the harder it became to convince himself. As the night wore on, Michael found himself cornered in a dull conversation with one of Sophie's colleagues. He tried to stay engaged, but his eyes kept drifting back to Amanda and Daniel. They were standing near the balcony now, their heads bent close together, their laughter too intimate for Michael's comfort. Something was wrong, he could feel it in his bones. Excusing himself, Michael moved through the crowd, weaving between clusters of people until he reached the balcony door. He stepped outside, the crisp night air hitting him like a slap. For a moment, he thought about turning back, about giving Amanda the benefit of the doubt. But then he saw them. Amanda and Daniel were standing in the shadows, their faces close, their bodies angled toward each other. Michael froze, his breath catching in his throat. He watched as Amanda leaned in, her lips meeting Daniel's in a kiss that was neither quick nor accidental. Time seemed to stop. The sounds of the party faded, replaced by the pounding of Michael's heart. He wanted to look away, to pretend he hadn't seen it, but he couldn't. The scene before him felt like a dagger twisting in his chest, each second more painful than the last. When Amanda finally pulled back, her face flushed, she turned and saw Michael standing there. Her eyes widened, the color draining from her face as their gazes locked. Daniel, oblivious to the tension, turned to see what she was looking at and immediately stepped back, his expression a mix of surprise and guilt. "Michael," Amanda said, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael didn't respond. He couldn't. His hands clenched into fists at his sides as he fought to keep his emotions in check. Without a word, he turned and walked back into the apartment, the noise of the party swallowing him whole. The ride home was suffocating. Amanda sat in the passenger seat, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She opened her mouth several times as if to say something, but the look on Michael's face stopped her. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. When they finally reached the house, Michael got out of the car without waiting for her. He slammed the door behind him and disappeared inside. Amanda followed hesitantly, her heart pounding as she prepared for the inevitable confrontation. She found him in the living room, standing by the window, his back to her. For a moment, she considered staying silent, letting the tension hang in the air. But guilt and fear pushed her to speak. "Michael," she began, her voice trembling. I'm sorry. I didn't mean." "Don't," he said sharply, cutting her off. He turned to face her, his eyes blazing with an anger she had never seen before. "Don't insult me by pretending this was a mistake. I saw you, Amanda. I saw everything." Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced herself to stand her ground. "It didn't mean anything. I was caught up in the moment." "Don't lie to me," he shouted, his voice echoing through the room. "Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I haven't noticed the way you've been pulling away? The way you look at me, like I'm some kind of burden?" Amanda flinched at his words, the truth of them cutting deeper than she expected. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice cracking. "I don't know what's wrong with me." "What's wrong with you?" Michael repeated, his tone bitter. "What's wrong with you is that you've been lying to me, Amanda. You've been lying to yourself. And now you've destroyed what little we had left." Her tears fell freely now, but Michael didn't soften. He couldn't. The pain and humiliation were too raw, too consuming. "Is this what you wanted?" he asked, his voice quieter but no less cutting. "To push me away? To make me feel like I'm not enough?" Amanda shook her head, her words failing her. She wanted to tell him that she hadn't meant for any of this to happen, that she still cared about him, but the truth felt too heavy to say out loud. Michael stared at her for a long moment, his expression hardening with resolve. "I can't do this anymore," he said finally. "I deserve better than this." "What are you saying?" Amanda asked, her voice barely audible. "I'm saying I'm done," he said, his tone final. "I'm done fighting for a marriage you clearly don't want. I'm done letting you make me feel worthless." He turned and walked past her, heading for the stairs. Amanda followed him, panic rising in her chest. "Michael, wait, please, let's talk about this." He stopped at the foot of the stairs and turned to face her, his expression weary. "I've spent months trying to talk to you, Amanda. trying to fix this. But you've made it clear that you don't want to be here. So I'm letting you go." The words hit Amanda like a blow. She stood frozen as Michael climbed the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the silence. When she finally moved, she sank onto the couch, her head in her hands as the weight of her actions crashed down on her. The next morning, Michael was gone. His side of the closet was empty, his toothbrush missing from the bathroom sink. Amanda found a note on the kitchen counter, written in Michael's neat handwriting. "I'll be staying at a friend's house. I've already contacted a lawyer. I'll send you the paperwork." Amanda stared at the note, her hands trembling. She wanted to scream, to cry, to call him and beg him to come back, but she knew it was too late. The damage had been done. In the weeks that followed, Amanda felt the full weight of her choices. Michael's absence was a gaping hole in her life, a constant reminder of what she had lost. The divorce papers arrived in the mail, and Amanda signed them with shaking hands, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. She had pushed Michael away, humiliated him, and betrayed his trust. And now she was left alone, haunted by the memory of the man she had once loved, and the fatal mistake that had cost her everything. The divorce was finalized in record time. Michael had been decisive, wasting no time in severing ties with Amanda after the night at Sophie's party. His lawyer, a quiet but efficient woman named Evelyn, had ensured the process was smooth on his end. Amanda, on the other hand, had dragged her feet, hoping against hope that Michael might reconsider. But he hadn't. The last time she saw him was in the courtroom, where he signed the papers without so much as a glance in her direction. When the gavel fell, Amanda felt the finality of it all hit her like a punch to the gut. She watched Michael walk out of the courthouse, his posture straighter, his stride confident, as though he had shed a weight he'd carried for too long. She wanted to call out to him, to tell him she was sorry, to beg for another chance. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white, the humiliation and regret a storm raging inside her. Michael didn't just leave their marriage behind, he left everything. The small house they'd once called home was sold within weeks, its modest furnishings split between them. Michael took only what he needed, leaving Amanda with the rest. She moved into a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, the kind of place where the walls were thin and the neighbors' arguments were as much a part of her life as her own thoughts. The apartment was nothing like the home they had shared. It was cold and impersonal, with faded wallpaper and a faint smell of mildew that no amount of air freshener could mask. Amanda filled it with pieces from their old life, a lamp from the living room, the small dining table they used to eat at, her favorite armchair. But instead of comfort, these items only served as reminders of what she had lost. Meanwhile, Michael was thriving. For years, he had put his dreams on hold, content to work at the bookstore while Amanda pursued her ambitions. But after the divorce, something shifted. He quit his job and used his share of the house sale to open a bicycle repair shop, a passion he'd harbored since he was a teenager. The shop, located on a bustling street in the heart of the city, quickly became a success. Michael threw himself into the work, finding solace in the rhythm of fixing things. He transformed the space into a reflection of himself, clean, efficient, and welcoming. Word spread about the shop, and soon Michael had a steady stream of customers, from cycling enthusiasts to families bringing in their kids' bikes. He also found a new community. His customers, fellow shop owners, and even a few old friends rallied around him, filling the void Amanda had left. For the first time in years, Michael felt alive, free, and confident in who he was. Amanda saw the shop for the first time on Instagram. Sophie had posted a picture, tagging Michael and raving about how her son's bike had never ridden better. Amanda stared at the photo, her heart sinking as she took in the vibrant, lively atmosphere of the shop. Michael was in the background of the picture, smiling as he worked on a bike. He looked happy, happier than Amanda had ever seen him. The photo was a stark contrast to Amanda's current reality. She spent her days at work, going through the motions, and her nights alone in the apartment, scrolling through social media and drowning in regret. Her friends, tired of her negativity, had started pulling away, their invitations growing less frequent until they stopped altogether. Even Sophie, once her closest confidant, seemed to have chosen Michael's side, posting photos of her family visiting his shop and praising him for his success. Amanda began to spiral. The small apartment that had once seemed like a temporary inconvenience now felt like a prison. The walls closed in on her, each day blending into the next. She tried to distract herself, watching TV, reading, even attempting to learn how to cook, but nothing could quiet the voice in her head that whispered of her mistakes. One evening, fueled by wine and a surge of desperation, Amanda decided to visit the shop. She told herself it was just curiosity, that she only wanted to see the life Michael had built for himself. But deep down, she hoped for something more, a chance to talk to him, to explain, to apologize. When she arrived, the shop was bustling with activity. Michael was at the counter, laughing with a customer as he rang up their purchase. Amanda hesitated, standing outside the glass door, unsure if she should go in. Before she could decide, Michael looked up and saw her. His smile faltered for a brief moment before he composed himself, nodding politely in her direction. Amanda's stomach churned as she pushed the door open, the bell above it jingling cheerfully. "Hi, Michael," she said, her voice barely audible over the hum of conversation and clinking tools. Michael glanced around the shop, his eyes flickering with discomfort. "Amanda, what are you doing here?" I just wanted to see the place," she said, forcing a smile. "Thanks," he said shortly, his tone polite but distant. Amanda shifted awkwardly, her confidence evaporating under his cold gaze. "You're doing well," she said. "I'm happy for you." Michael nodded but didn't reply. The silence between them was heavy, the weight of their shared history pressing down on both of them. "I miss you," Amanda blurted out, her voice breaking. "I made a mistake, Michael." "I know I did." Michael's expression hardened. "Amanda, I've moved on. You should too." His words were like a slap, and Amanda felt the sting of humiliation rise in her cheeks. Before she could say anything else, a woman approached the counter, placing a hand on Michael's arm. She was warm and pretty, with an easy smile that lit up her face. "Everything okay?" the woman asked, glancing between them. Michael nodded, his expression softening as he turned to her. "Yeah. This is Amanda, my ex-wife." The woman's smile didn't waver, but Amanda felt her world tilt. She nodded politely, mumbling something about needing to leave, before turning and walking out of the shop as quickly as she could. The walk back to her apartment was a blur. Amanda's mind raced with thoughts of the woman in the shop, the ease with which Michael had introduced her as his ex-wife, and the finality of his words, "I've moved on." When she got home, she sank onto the couch, her chest heaving as she fought back tears. She had lost him, truly lost him. And not just Michael, but the life they had built together. The house, the quiet evenings, the steady comfort of knowing someone was always there, all of it was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness she didn't know how to fill. For the first time, Amanda allowed herself to fully feel the weight of her actions. She thought of the night she kissed Daniel, the sharp words she had thrown at Michael, the countless ways she had pushed him away. She had taken him for granted, believing he would always be there, no matter how much she hurt him. But she had been wrong. Now, alone in her tiny apartment, Amanda realized the full cost of her mistakes. Michael had moved on, building a life without her, while she was left to face the consequences of her choices. And as the days stretched into weeks, Amanda came to understand a painful truth: some mistakes can't be undone, and some losses are permanent. Thank you for taking the time to read this story. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about Amanda and Michael's journey? Have you ever experienced betrayal or heartbreak in your own life? If you feel comfortable, share your story in the comments. Your voice matters to us, and we value every single one of you who takes the time to engage with our content. Remember, no matter what you're going through, you are important, and your experiences shape who you are. We deeply appreciate your support and the connection we share with each of you. If you enjoyed this story or found it thought-provoking, consider subscribing to stay updated with more content like this. A like on this post would mean the world to us, as it helps us reach others who might connect with these stories. Wishing you a wonderful day filled with kindness and reflection. Take care, and we'll see you next time.